Thanks, everybody. Welcome to Build. I'm your host, Ricky Camilleri. Ben McKenzie has been killing it on Gotham for 4 seasons, which for my money is the most fun superhero adaptation there is out there. What you probably don't know about Mr. McKenzie is that behind the scenes, he's been writing and directing some of the best episodes. You can see his directorial skills in this week's episode. Let's take a look at a clip.
What the hell? We gotta get them out of there. Don't shoot, they're hypnotized. They're hypnotized. Don't shoot. All right, buddy, come on. Hey.
Lo and behold, the bold Captain Jim Gordon and his rusty caboose in tow.
You have us, Tetch. Let them go.
Do you recall when I first came to this fair city, Jim? A bawling mess, wanting nothing more than to address the safety of my dear sister Alice?
What's the choice this time, Tetch? How do I save them? Just tell me what you want.
What I want is my sister back! But you kept me from saving her. You gave me no choice! So no more choices for you either. No more saving. No! Soon the bells will toll, Jim. How many more will grow cold, Jim? Like your soul, Jim. How many would-be flyers will be dyers, splattered, like my poor spitted Alice when the Gotham bells toll their full roll?
Everybody, the mastermind behind that 6th scene, Ben McKenzie.
Hello.
Hey.
How are you, sir?
Thanks so much for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Let's talk about that scene in this episode, but let's go back to the first episode that you directed last season and how this started. How did you approach the producers and say, hey, I want to direct, and where did that instinct come from, that drive?
I approached them like this. I said, please, 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 please. Danny Cannon, who is our executive producer in charge of directing. Sorry, I'm just fixing the jacket thing. Directed the pilot, is really credited with creating the visual style of the show. I begged him after season 1, and he said, okay, give it a year. And so season 3, I got to direct.
Is that give it a year to, let's just make sure, one more season of getting everything kind of comfortable?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'd shadowed a lot. Shadowing is when you follow a director around for prep and you sort of familiarize yourself with the process. I shadowed a number of times on my previous show, Southland. Right. And learned a lot there, and then shadowed Danny a few times. Having made close to 250 hours of television at this point, I've been on a set a lot, so I'm certainly familiar with the and I try to, pay attention to what's happening behind the camera as opposed to just, indulging in the narcissistic profession that is acting.
How do I look great?
Well, that's still important, and I still, focus on that too. But a man can multitask.
Right.
So I'm familiar with that, but then you also need to see pre-production, which is obviously incredibly important, and post-production. So those are the 3 phases of production: pre-production and post, and they're all 3 equally important. So you've got to, spend time doing that.
One of the things that I think is so fascinating about TV directors versus film directors is that mostly with television, I think even in a show as stylistic and visually ambitious as Gotham is, your job a lot of times as a director is to hide behind the stamp of the show and not have a very distinct stamp as an individual director. Yet you still are choosing specific shots, choosing the blocking, and you can see all of that in that clip that we just saw. But at the same time, you're kind of cutting away before we're supposed to go, oh, what director came up with this incredible shot right here? What is that like as a director?
Well, you look, having now written and directed, you see the process from beginning to end. And there are certain limitations that network TV imposes upon its storytelling structure, right? Like when I wrote the episode, I realized, oh, right, you have to have an act break every 5 or 10 pages because they've got to sell you some soap in between all of this stuff that this wonderful storytelling we're doing. So,
Gotta have what they call a blow or something like that at the act break,
yeah,
right?
exactly. It basically you ramp up at the very end, and we cut to commercial. What's going to happen next? We come back in. We describe what just happened. We perhaps describe what's happening now, and perhaps we even indicate what might happen in the future. And then
Act break.
and then act break, and then we do it again and again and again and again and again. Not to totally demystify the process. Sorry, this is like the biggest bummer of an interview. But there is a style. It's more than a style. There's what I call story math to it. What people call story math. There's a lot of. It's a little bit of an actual puzzle that you have to literally sort of configure and beat into submission in order to fit the confines, the very comfortable confines of network television. And so, as a director, I also was able to use that knowledge. But you try to put your stamp on it, but you're not going to be able to do, like, if your goal is to do the touch of evil one shot that lasts like 2.5 minutes at the beginning of and does the entire scene in a oneer, perhaps you want to rethink your process. It's never going to make it.
And if you walk into the sort of pre-production planning as the star of the show, who's
Right.
directing your first or second episode, and is like,
Yeah.
I'm going to do a 2.5 minute oneer,
Right.
they're going to be like, gosh, shit.
I know. Exactly. You're like, ooh, yeah. I showed up with my beret and my my long cigarette, and I thought,
Made a huge
was this
mistake.
shot we will do? No, and they you have to pick your battles for sure and figure out what you can get away with. But I mean, look, the show, I'm very proud of it, obviously, and it has its own distinctive style, which I do find is unique, both in terms of its look and in terms of its tone. It's quite a bit darker and more sadistic than most any other network television superhero show, I would argue, and more than almost any other, even regardless of where it airs. At the same time, it has a lot of sort of big poppier moments in it, kind of like more sort of popcorn-friendly moments in it, because it's more in the world of Tim Burton's Batman than it is, or it's between the Nolan and Burton, but it's more in the Burton sort of tonal structure. So,
And I was saying to you backstage, one of the things that I love about it is that even when it has those big popcorny moments, it's not kind of calling attention to itself for having a big popcorny moment or calling attention to itself for being dark. It has kind of created a world, and it exists sort of sincerely within that world.
Exactly. That's certainly the intention, right? Is to not become too self-referential and not too cute.
So when you asked to write an episode, asked to write an episode,
Yes.
what was is there like a long-term goal for you, or are you just kind of like, I've been doing this for a while, I'd really like to be behind the scenes as well as in front of the camera, please, can I have that opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, the long-term goal is to be able to be involved creatively from the beginning all the way through the end. As an actor, you start off, and if you're lucky to have anyone hire you, you are hired at the end of the process. Well, not the end of the process, when the process is well through its development stage and ready to be shot, right? And that's, you go to auditions and you audition for things, and if you are lucky enough to be hired, you start shooting usually relatively quickly, especially if it's television. As you get your reps in, you do more and more work. If you're able to familiarize yourself with other parts of the process, then hopefully you can change that dynamic to where you are able to create, usually alongside other people, inevitably alongside other people, but even from the beginning, maybe team up with a writer and come up with a concept and pitch a television series, and maybe you're in that series, maybe you're not, but you want to direct it. I mean, there's so many actors doing such incredible work in front of the camera and behind it, and there are so many people are able to watch stories in formats that was never possible when I started out, and that was only about 15 years ago. When I started on the OC, we was still, network TV and some cable, and even cable then wasn't what it is now, much less streaming and all the other, So now, as a storyteller, if you're able to understand conceptually sort of how stories can be told in a variety of ways, the avenues for telling them are nearly unlimited.
Have you wanted to direct or be like a full storyteller outside of just acting since the beginning of your career? Was that always kind of the goal?
No, it wasn't the beginning. No, at the beginning I was scared blankless that I didn't know what I was doing, and I was going to be exposed. And then I learned
Good actor, like
Yeah,
a good actor does. Yeah.
exactly. And then I realized that nobody knows anything, and that great saying about the entertainment business. And so over, I would say the last 7 years, I've been thinking about it, and I've been writing. No one's ever paid me to write until Gotham.
You were writing your own material before Gotham.
Sure.
Yeah, that's great.
More as an exercise more than anything else. And now I've been blessed to have the opportunity to do it, and to do it with such an incredible structure already set, that is actually incredibly supportive and freeing ultimately, because at the end of the day, you could write a great short film, but then you've got to, find money to make it. You've got to hire a director of photography. You've got to hire a crew. You've got to get actors. Here we have a script that comes to you, and you get to, jump right in as a director, or as a writer, you are in a room with other writers, seasoned writers, breaking a story and getting into the minutia of doing it, knowing that it's not only that it's going to be shot, it has to be shot. So someone's going to do it, right? And you're going to get whatever help you need to do it.
There are deadlines that need to be met.
And nothing is better than a deadline.
Yeah. Now, you are, I think Gotham is, for the most part, an ensemble show, but you are, I would say, for all intents and purposes, #1 on the call sheet. When you ask if
I am literally, yes.
When you step into the writer's room to start working on a script with them, how did you make sort of all the writers comfortable and okay with...
I'm sorry, make them comfortable?
I
wouldn't, no. Why would I do such a thing?
You just throw up... That's my idea.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Don't you know who I am? Jim Gordon. It's right there. It's on the poster. No, you just be yourself, and, make sure to make fun of yourself several times early on in the process so that everyone feels comfortable that this is not some sort of overly narcissistic actor. I wouldn't say unnarcissistic, but not an extraordinarily narcissistic actor, just like on the spectrum.
No matter what anybody says, telling stories isn't inherently, there's like a narcissistic aspect of telling, being the center of attention,
Yes.
be it as a writer or
Yes.
a director or an actor.
Sure, and then you're pitching a story where I think Jim Gordon should say I have a really great line right here where he talks about how heroic he is. This has nothing to do with me playing Jim Gordon, but if maybe Jim Gordon could.
Jim needs a better line in my episode.
We need maybe, yeah. No, the writers were great. We have a great room. It's constantly changing season to season, but we have a really, it's a show that people want to work on in a variety of capacities. So we get really good people across the board.
How does the show stay so visually vibrant, I think? Because how does it do that? Because so many shows try to create a world like this,
Right.
but end up within a season or two feeling sort of like a cheap version of what they started with on the pilot. And I think Gotham does an amazing job, be it with the studios that they've built or sort of recreating these different landmarks around New York City in its own way. It maintains a very specific visual style that is beautiful all the way through.
Thank you. Well, it's a lot of hard work by a lot of people. Is how you do it. Attention to detail. You write the show a specific way. You shoot it a specific way. We take advantage of all the incredible architecture that is in New York City, and being able to shoot in New York and making that being financially viable because of the tax credit is enormous for us. Without that, the show just couldn't be what it is. And there was that discussion early on. Are we shooting in LA? Are we shooting in New York? And I, for one, was very adamant that we should shoot in New York. I obviously don't get to make that call completely, but I was very much pushing for that.
Because you're a fan, because you wanted to live in New York for a little while?
Yeah, basically. No, but I told him it was creative. But it is creative,
Merkle
too.
looks so much better.
Honestly, if you're going to shoot Gotham, you should probably shoot Gotham in New York. Like you probably shouldn't be doing it in a backlot in Burbank.
When you do it in a backlot in Burbank, it's going to look like exactly what I was sort of referencing. It's going to look like a series of sets that are thrown together very quickly because you have to have all these different locations. Whereas with New York, you're just doing minor tweaks a lot of times, just locations that I know in New York, but they look so much different within the context of the world.
Sure, because you can do, lighting design. We have incredible cinematographers, right? We have these guys are, ASC nominated every year and winning the Cinematographers Award for television many years. And we have incredible visual effects as well to enhance shots. I mean, the shot, for example, where that couple just got impaled there, or crushed, I should say, not impaled. His sister was impaled, though they were crushed. You may or may not have been able to notice, but there was an awful lot of visual effects tinkering after the fact. I mean, that particular shot where there were a lot of shots in that sequence where they died. It cut together very quickly, but the shot, the full-on shot where the ball just crushes them, obviously was not done with real people underneath it. There were two shots blended into each other, a blank shot with the ball dropping with nobody there, and then a shot with are real people there, no ball dropping, and then three shots, and then a shot with dummies that were crushed.
So they actually crushed dummies in that shot?
Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, and then our visual effects team, which won an Emmy this last year, is incredible, and they did everything from, I don't know if you noticed, but as the ball hit the people, the impact of the ball crushing them caused the cars to sway, to bounce a little bit. That we obviously could not do in actual production because we couldn't actually drop a massive, but that's a fake ball that's made out of, it's still about 200 pounds, but it's made out of, I think, a really, really hard foam. But they added all those, the blood splatter, all that stuff. I mean, it's an incredible amount of attention to detail, is circling back to your original question.
So when you go into directing a scene like that, and the script is calling for all these things to happen, how much do you know about how this is going to be done, and how much are you sort of asking questions and figuring it out?
You mean, well, I know, that's a really good question. I mean, honestly, my advice to anyone entering into any version of this business is to be very upfront and open about what you don't know. People are much more willing to help you if you don't come in with like an attitude about sort of, I know this, I know that, especially if you don't actually know it. It's going to be really embarrassing, and people kind of go, why is this guy being such a jerk?
Because there is that sort of, people always tell, I think, young directors to not show weakness and to always be really confident and on top of it in front of everybody else.
Confidence is different than humility. Like, I think one can be both humble and confident at the same time. I have absolute confidence that I will get it done. I will get it done. I will make my days. I will. The performances will be very good. Not really because of me. We have a great cast, but I do know how to work with the actors. There are other areas. The episode that I just directed has a lot of green screen work, so a lot of visual effects that were added after the fact. A lot of stuff was not. A lot of it was shot practically and blended with stuff that was shot in front of a green screen. Now, I am not sitting in post-production with our effects team, moving digital effects around or creating, obviously, right? No director would be.
You're also potentially on set for the next episode or something.
Of course, yeah. Well, yes, exactly. But even if I weren't, even if I wasn't the lead of the show, even if I didn't have to go and sit on shoot the next scenes, I as a director, a normal, regular, jobbing television director, I wouldn't be sitting there in the editing bay for that purpose. So you have to trust that these people know what they're doing, and ask whatever questions you need answered before it's too late, before you've finished shooting it, so that they have all the tools that they need. Tom and his team, the visual effects team, were on set during filming for all the crucial sequences, so I could ask those questions. Just be humble. They're there to help.
How did you choose this episode, or how did they choose this episode for you to direct? Because there's some pretty fantastic set pieces within this episode. One of which we saw, another which with everybody on top of the buildings. Right. So how did this episode come your way?
This one, so this is number 16 of season 4. I did 16 of season 3 as well. The reason for that is we prep at the end of the calendar year, right before we take a 2-week Christmas break, and come back and start shooting in beginning of the year. And so it gives you the most time to think. It gives you the most time to sort of for better or worse, stew over the decisions that you've made. And so
Time away from performing on set.
correct,
Right? Yeah.
to get a little bit of a break too, a little bit of a breather, and go home for Christmas and kind of have some sense of to be able to take a breath. And so they did that on purpose both times for me, which I'm very grateful for. In terms of the actual script, I was very grateful that Charlie Houston, the guy that wrote the script, was assigned to that episode. That was kind of a solid that John Stevens, the executive producer, showrunner, did for me by assigning Charlie to that script. And Charlie's, one of our best writers, and he's a very experienced hand, and he wrote a terrific script. And when, to the extent that he was listening to me before writing it, which he really wasn't. He's really off doing his own thing. I was, having done it before once, I was ready to just go for it. Give me the biggest, craziest, wildest episode you can, and let's see if I can shoot it.
Was there something that you wanted to focus on directorially with this episode versus the last episode, or is it just about kind of telling the story the best way that you can?
Yeah, I mean, no, I don't. We're not. On network television, network television for sure. Directors don't really involve at that stage of the process usually. They have a plan. The writers have a plan for how they want the season to go overall, and how the nooks and crannies and the evolution of the characters over the course of 22 episodes. There's a lot of episodes. So by the time that episode comes into formation, before it's actually sort of sculpted by the writer, the last thing that they really are indulging are like the director's whims of like, well, you want to tell this story, but as a director, I want to do an underwater sequence involving,
Not so much that, more like you were saying working with the actors. So
Yes.
I meant more like blocking with the actors or working with the performances.
or
or
the things I wanted to work on.
Yeah,
my own
or
process.
cinematography specifically, because
Yes.
one of the great freedoms I think of working in television, especially something that's been on for a few seasons, is that you have your DPs who've been there for a little while, so they can kind of function a little bit. I would never say on their own, but you have your actors who have been playing these characters for a couple seasons as well.
Yeah.
So you can I wonder if you can kind of go in and be like, well, this episode, I really want to flex this part of my directorial skills, or learn this part more so.
Yeah, I mean, so the first episode that I did last year, I was very cautious about it, very conservative, because I wanted to make sure that I would just get it well enough to where I wasn't going to not be asked back to direct some more, that I was going to, check all of the boxes, right? Well,
That would be so sad.
wouldn't that be so sad?
To be on the show
They'd
for
be
the
like,
rest of the show's script, you keep asking, they're like, no,
hey,
you didn't. We'll see, Ben.
Look,
we'll see.
it can happen. Honestly, it really can. I mean, it doesn't. There are many, many ways to screw that up. So I was very cautious, and the second time around, I really wanted to go for it. So, one of the things that I really wanted to focus on were all the things that I was not as skilled at, from my acting experience, which was a lot of action, a lot of intricate camera movement, and I absolutely leaned heavily on Scott Keevan, who was the DP for the episode that I directed, the alternate, and our camera operators and our whole camera team, which is incredible. Leaned heavily on them, but again, if you have a conversation, start a conversation early on in the process with your DP, in terms of how you want something to feel or to look. You don't have to have the technical language. If these people are very skilled, they don't need you to tell them, well, I need a 200-foot crane here, and I need we're going to do a different shutter speed here, or whatever. They'll know how to do that part. Yeah. Just talk to them about mood, feeling, have a creative conversation, and they will interpret your words for you.
I love the opening sequence of the episode where we're following the guard with the headphones on. And I always love Gotham's selection of music because it's disco.
Right, yeah,
often,
totally.
And you're like, wait, so when does this take place? And what world does this take place in? In the same way that Burton had Prince in the first Batman, which was still such a strange choice for that world. Yeah.
Charlie chose the song, but it is a great, it just opens up the world a lot, and kind of, music is so unbelievably important to creating a full, immersive experience for an audience. But we have a score that goes along with our which was evidence in the clip that you showed, which is great and certainly forms like the tonal backdrop of the show from a sound design perspective. But the use of actual, pop music or whatever to throw you down a different alley to kind of throw your headspace off a little bit is very helpful. Charlie wrote a great sequence. I just shot it.
Oh, really? Do you feel like wrote a sequence with those shot dynamics as well?
No,
Okay,
it doesn't describe that stuff, but it describes it's a guard who's in the, you don't really know what's happening, but she's in the maximum security wing of Arkham, and she sees a red light going off in the deep background as she's sitting there flipping through a wrestling magazine, and she has to go and put headphones on, and she pops on the headphones and turns on the song, and she's kind of enjoying her trip down the dark hallway. What you realize ultimately as she opens the door is that she's in Mad Hatter's cell, and she has to have headphones on, otherwise he's going to be able to hypnotize her. If she can hear what he's saying, she will fall under his spell. And so every guard that goes into his cell has to have headphones on. So then Charlie chose a great song for her to be, walking around to. I did some stuff with the frame rate in order to do some slow-mo, shots to get us into the mood, because the song has a certain pace to it that's kind of slow and sultry and fun. And we did some great performance stuff. We shot it shot her POV as well as outside of her POV, so we could kind of be inside of her head as she was listening to the music, and also outside of her, so that we could see her ultimately get killed. She gets killed.
I didn't want to spoil that.
Sorry,
That's all right.
she's dead.
Yeah.
Oh well.
When did you guys shoot this episode?
In January.
In January. So you come back from the holiday, you start shooting this episode, and then when you're not directing an episode, or you didn't write an episode this season, did you?
I did. So
you did. Sorry, that was the beginning.
Beginning of the season. It's a long season.
Right. Yeah, that's what I mean. You guys
really
do
long.
20 episodes?
22.
You do 20. Like
we
the
start in
old school
June,
22.
and we just wrapped Friday.
That's wild.
Isn't it?
So when
Wild's a word for it.
You just wrapped Friday, it's March, and you start in June again, you have 4 months off. Do
3.
you even, with those 4 months off, want to go and try to do 3 months off, excuse me, go and
right.
try to do anything else, or are you like,
I mean, you
good?
could if you had energy to do it. Yeah, no, I would like to maybe, but it's also you need some time just to kind of breathe.
Yeah, because you're doing 12-hour days a lot of the, like 16,
At least.
12, 16-hour days most of the time. Yeah. Let's get some questions from our audience. Who has a question? Right here.
Hi, Ben.
Hi.
This question is from my friend William, who wishes he could be here.
Okay.
You're his hero.
Sure.
For the Clayface Gordon scene in season 2, how much of it did you improv, and how often do you go off script?
That's a good question. I don't go off script a lot. I do. It's not an improvised show for sure. I mean, it's heavily written and intricately written. That being said, I feel free to give notes to writers or to slightly alter dialogue on the day, and we have a very collaborative group of writers who are willing to let that happen. In terms of Clayface, almost all of that was verbatim the script. Bruno Heller wrote that episode and came up with that concept, and I love Bruno, and he's the reason I did the show to begin with, and it was an opportunity. I chose the voice. I chose, like, what would somebody doing Jim Gordon, if they'd only barely seen Jim Gordon, what would they do? How would they portray him? What's the stereotype of him? And the stereotype was basically like a John Wayne, like he's kind of sort of deep voice and kind of a jerk, actually, because Clayface doesn't understand that Jim Gordon is actually a nice guy. He thinks he's probably just kind of a cowboy, so acted as kind of like an a-hole, and it worked. Anyway, thank you for the question.
Next question. Right there.
I believe it's me. Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Ben. Oh my God, huge fan of Gotham. By the way, love your socks.
Thank you very much.
I was just thinking off the top of my head, but from what version of Batman, if you are a huge fan of DC, Batman, what influenced you to become that version of Detective Gordon from Batman? Or anything influenced?
Yeah, that's a good. I mean, so we've never seen Gordon in a live action. We've never seen this chapter of Gordon's life live action, right? Like, we've never actually seen young Detective Gordon, right? We've seen a lot of Commissioner Gordons, various iterations over the years, which have been phenomenal. So I didn't base it in anything that I saw live action. I read or reread in some instances comics that I thought would be sort of tonally similar. Gotham Central is great, but that's more of a tonal thing. Year One was very important, kind of the Frank Miller versions of the comics. But in terms of what I hoped to do was start with a character who's very similar. You have no trouble imagining him as an elder, eventual Commissioner Gordon, but at the time we meet him, he's quite a bit different in the sense that he hasn't been broken down enough yet. He's still idealistic. He still has a certain rigid sense of morality that we will slowly watch it chipped away as he has to kind of get things done in Gotham. So start off as a military guy, shave my head, have a certain cadence and a certain rigidity, and then watch over the years as it kind of slowly crushes him. That's the feel-good answer I'm sure you were looking for. Thanks for the question.
I think of one more.
Hey, great meeting you. You were like a hero to me growing up, watching the OC. We was in the hood watching OC, so that's crazy. So it was an honor to meet you. What advice would you have for like an up-and-coming director in the business? And also, what I was gonna ask you, I forgot, so let me just ask you that question.
Your
what
director
advice?
as well?
Yeah.
Or aspirator. I would say as a director, my advice would be similar to as an actor, which would be to just do stuff, make stuff. It doesn't matter if you can shoot things on iPhones now. I mean, Steven Soderbergh shoots a lot of stuff on iPhones. If you're a director, get out there and get your reps in however you can. If you're an actor, act. If you're a director, direct. If you're a writer, write. It doesn't matter the format. You definitely shouldn't expect to get paid initially. I did a lot of off Broadway theater and acting in college and various plays. You just need to keep doing it in order to get better at doing it. And eventually, if you do it enough, and you are sort of hungry enough and lucky enough, somebody will look at you and go, okay, great, I'll hire you to do something and I'll actually pay you something.
You need to be doing it for that to happen.
I think so.
Nobody gets seen unless they're in something.
Correct.
Or creating something.
Correct. I don't think there's any other way to square that circle. Like, you've got to keep doing things. Like, if you don't, and I also think that inertia builds on itself in a positive way and in a negative way. If you're not doing things, then you tend to sort of, you get a little down, and you tend to look. The business of it is very challenging. It's not easy. It's a total free for all. Like, I can't tell you to read this book or take this class or meet this person. Like, it just doesn't work that way. You've got to just keep doing stuff, and eventually someone will tap you on the shoulder and say, do it for me.
Is there a part of you that wants to direct movies at all, or yeah?
And I'm working on that, and we'll see if that happens.
Is that a more daunting or scary process for you as a director, considering that like a movie you kind of have to put together all ground up?
Yes, it is, because what you're relying on in a television show in part is the infrastructure is already there, right? DP's already hired, crew's already hired. You've got your camera department set. You've got your sets already built. You've got you've got your post-production already locked down. So for a feature director, you have to come up with all of that stuff on your own or with the help of a production company. And if it was a studio project, a studio. So trying to figure out how to do that. But yeah, I'd absolutely like to do that. I mean, I think that in terms of trying to do a more, the advantage of doing a feature is that obviously it is much more your particular vision as opposed to being a part of a show that already has a vision and a tone and a structure. So the same things that make it challenging also could make it more rewarding.
Absolutely. Well, I look forward to that. And your episode of Gotham is on this Thursday night, right?
That's right.
On Fox. And what is the name of the episode again? Excuse me?
One of My Three Soups.
One of My Three Soups. Yeah, I really like that.
I didn't come up with it. Charlie did a great job.
Ben McKenzie, everybody. Let's hear it.
Thanks for coming out, guys.